shadow in the woods. The crisp autumn air filled the lungs of the four hikers as they trudged through the forest, the canopy above ablaze with shades of orange, red, and gold. It was a perfect day for a fall hike. Claire, the de facto leader of the group, was at the front, her camera in hand, capturing every vivid leaf and sunlit beam. Behind her, Greg, her boyfriend, carried a backpack full of snacks and water, followed by Emma and Ben, two of their closest friends who were always up for an adventure. The air smelled of pine and earth, and the ground crunched beneath their boots. It felt like the perfect escape from the stresses of their daily lives. "This is incredible," Claire said, snapping a picture of a particularly large maple leaf. "We should have done this earlier." "I told you, fall hikes are the best," Greg replied. "The colors, the cool air, and no bugs." Emma smiled, her brown eyes scanning the trail ahead. "I'm just glad we picked a less traveled path. It feels like we've got the whole forest to ourselves." Ben chuckled. "Yeah, until we get lost and have to live off the land. I hope you know how to make fire. I'll just rub two of your bad jokes together for some friction." Emma shot back playfully. Group shared a laugh, the sound carrying through the trees, mixing with the rustling of the leaves in the wind. For a moment, everything seemed perfect, but as they hiked deeper into the woods, the lights seemed to change. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting longer shadows across the forest floor. Greg stopped in his tracks, looking over his shoulder. "Did you guys hear that?" The others paused. The forest now strangely silent. "Hear what?" Claire asked, lowering her camera. Greg frowned, scanning the trees. "I don't know. I thought I heard something. Probably a deer or something," Ben offered with a shrug, though there was a hint of unease in his voice. They continued walking, but now the lightheartedness of the hike had dissipated. As they moved deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to close in on them, their branches gnarly and twisted. The wind, once gentle, now howled faintly, like a distant moan. Claire walked ahead, determined to reach the clearing she'd read about in a hiker's guide, but something tugged at the edge of her consciousness. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Anyone else feel weird?" Emma asked, her voice small. "Like we're not alone." Ben smirked, trying to shake the tension. "It's the woods, There's probably a squirrel sizing us up right now." Greg stopped again, his brow furrowed. "No, I feel it too. Like something's watching us." Claire opened her mouth to say something when she saw a shadow flitting between the trees. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but she caught it. Her heart skipped a beat. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Emma turned to her, eyes wide. "See what?" "I thought I saw something dark moving between the trees." Greg frowned. "Like a bear." Claire shook her head. "No, it wasn't a bear." The group huddled together, peering into the dense forest, but nothing moved. The only sound was the rustling of the leaves in the wind. They stood there for a long moment, holding their breath, waiting for anything to reveal itself. "We're probably just spooking ourselves," Greg said, though his voice lacked confidence. "Let's keep moving," Claire urged. The clearing should be close. As they pressed on, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, the air colder. The cheerful colors of the leaves now seemed to fade into shades of rust and decay. Emma, walking beside Ben, glanced over her shoulder repeatedly, convinced something was following them, lurking just out of sight. Suddenly, a loud snap echoed through the woods like a branch breaking. Everyone froze. "What was that?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Claire's eyes darted around, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. "We should keep going," she said, her heart pounding in her chest. But as they continued, the shadow appeared again, this time closer. Claire saw it clearly. A figure, tall and featureless, moving silently between the trees, like smoke. She stopped dead in her tracks, her blood turning to ice. "There," she cried, pointing. "Did you see it?" The others turned, but it was gone, vanishing into the darkening forest. Panic settled over the group. "I think we need to turn back," Greg said, his voice shaking. "Yeah, this isn't fun anymore," Ben added, gripping Emma's hand tightly. They turned to retrace their steps, but the trail behind them was no longer clear. The path they had taken was gone, swallowed by the underbrush. The once familiar trail markers had disappeared. "What the hell?" Greg muttered, spinning around. "We've been on this path the whole time. It's like it's gone," Emma whispered, her face pale. Claire's mind raced. "We can't panic. We just need to stay calm and keep moving. We'll find our way out." But no matter which direction they turned, the forest seemed to twist and shift around them, as if leading them deeper into its dark heart. The sun had almost set, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor, and the shadowy figure, whatever it was always there, moving just beyond their vision. The deeper they went, the more distorted their surroundings became. The vibrant autumn forest now seemed decayed, as if the trees themselves were rotting from within. The wind carried strange whispers, unintelligible but filled with malice. Each breath felt colder, sharper, and more dangerous. The shadow appeared again, only this time it wasn't just watching. It was coming closer. Greg grabbed Claire's arm, pulling her forward. "Run. We need to run." They broke into a sprint, tearing through the underbrush, branches scratching their arms and legs. But no matter how fast they ran, the shadow moved faster. It seemed to glide through the trees, effortlessly closing the distance between them. Emma screamed, stumbling to the ground. Ben was at her side in an instant, pulling her to her feet. "Come on!" "Don't stop." But the shadow was closing in, its form shifting and stretching like smoke, its presence suffocating. Claire's lungs burned and her legs ached, but fear propelled her forward. She could hear Greg breathing heavily beside her, his face pale with terror. The forest had transformed into a maze of twisted branches and gnarled roots, trapping them in its dark web. Suddenly, the group burst into a small clearing, the first open space they had seen in hours. They stopped, panting, their eyes scanning the trees for the shadowy figure, but it was gone, at least for the moment. "What was that?" Ben gasped, his hands trembling. "I don't know," Claire whispered, her heart racing. "But we need to find a way out of here." Greg, his face pale and covered in sweat, pointed toward the far side of the clearing. "Look." In the fading light, they saw a strange structure. An old stone altar covered in moss and decaying leaves. The air around it felt wrong, thick with a heavy, oppressive energy. The whispers in the wind grew louder, more distinct, as if the forest itself was alive and aware of their presence. "We need to keep moving," Claire urged, backing away from the altar. But the moment they turned to leave the clearing, the shadow reappeared, blocking their path. It was closer now, close enough to see that it had no face, no features. It was a mass of darkness, vaguely humanoid but devoid of any recognizable form. The whispers turned into a low, guttural growl echoing through the trees. "We're trapped," Emma whimpered, her voice shaking. The shadow moved forward slowly, deliberately. The air grew colder, and the forest around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable. In a moment of desperate courage, Greg grabbed a large stick from the ground, holding it in front of him like a weapon. "Stay back," he shouted, though his voice betrayed his fear. The shadow stopped, hovering at the edge of the clearing. It didn't move, but its presence felt suffocating, like a storm waiting to strike. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The trees creaked and groaned, their branches swaying violently. The whispers turned into screams, filling the air with a cacophony of voices of the damned trapped in the cursed forest for all eternity. Claire's mind raced. They had to get out, had to escape, but there was no way out. The forest had ensnared them just as it had done to countless others before. Suddenly, the shadow lunged forward, its form stretching and twisting like a serpent. Claire screamed, diving to the side as the figure passed over her, its icy touch brushing against her skin. Greg swung the stick wildly, but it passed through the shadow, hitting nothing but air. The shadow seemed to laugh, a low, menacing sound that reverberated through the clearing. "We're going to die here," Emma sobbed, clutching Ben's arm. "No, we're not," Claire said, her voice trembling but filled with determination. "We're getting out of here." The shadow loomed closer, its form expanding, growing darker and more menacing. In a final desperate act, Claire grabbed Greg's hand, pulling him toward the altar. "Maybe it's the key," she whispered. "Maybe it's the only way to stop it." The group rushed toward the ancient altar, their footsteps echoing in the still air. The shadow followed, its form stretching and writhing as it closed in. Claire reached the altar, her hands shaking as she touched its cold surface.